The crystal chandeliers scattered rainbow patterns across the grand ballroom of the Riverside Manor, where Boston's wealthiest gathered in their expensive evening wear. 27-year-old Claire Morgan smoothed down her modest navy cocktail dress, the only formal outfit in her closet, and resisted the impulse to leave. As an American Sign Language interpreter hired for the Boston Children's Medical Center annual benefit, she felt out of place among these privileged guests, but the freelance income was essential. Stay present and accessible if needed, her supervisor had reminded her. So far, nobody required interpretation services, leaving Claire feeling like a shadow as she moved through the glittering crowd. That's when she noticed her. Tucked away near a decorative pillar in the ballroom's distant corner sat a teenage girl wearing an elegant sapphire gown. While others chatted and laughed around her, she remained quiet, her eyes alert and perceptive. Despite her expensive dress and pearl earrings, something about her body language, the subtle stiffness in her frame, the focused way she watched people's mouths, was instantly familiar to Claire. This girl was deaf and completely isolated. Claire's focus shifted when excitement rippled through the gathering. Marcus Dalton, technology mogul and tonight's guest of honor, had made his entrance. His company, Dalton Technologies, had contributed several million to the medical center's new research facility. Flashbulbs exploded as he walked in, a distinguished man with graying temples and an authoritative bearing. The crowd moved toward him instinctively, desperate for proximity to his influence. "Mr. Dalton, this way, please," photographers called out, while prominent donors competed for his attention. Claire looked back toward the girl in sapphire, observing how she watched her father, for who else could the renowned Marcus Dalton be to her? With mixed feelings of admiration and loneliness. Not once did Dalton glance at his daughter, and not once did anyone acknowledge her presence. Gathering her courage, Claire walked across the room. When she approached, the girl's eyes showed surprise at being directly addressed. "Hi there," Claire signed, her hands moving with practiced fluency.
I'm Claire.
"What's your name?" The girl's expression transformed completely. The practiced mask of polite detachment vanished, replaced by genuine happiness that touched Claire's heart. How long had this girl been waiting for someone to speak her language? "I'm Sophie," she signed back, her movements swift and graceful. "You know sign language? Are you deaf?" "No," Claire responded, her fingers creating the signs naturally. "I'm an interpreter. I work with the Children's Medical Center sometimes." "The one my father funded," Sophie nodded, something conflicted flickering in her eyes. "I'm supposed to stand here looking decorative for the publicity photos later." The resentment in her face revealed everything. Sophie was accustomed to being decoration, not a participant. "Well, until then," Claire signed. "Would you like someone who actually communicates with you?" Sophie's laugh was soundless, but full of expression. "Absolutely. I've been lip-reading all evening until my head aches. Do you know how many people here discover I can lip-read and then overemphasize every word like I'm a toddler?" Claire grinned, knowing precisely what she meant. Or they raise their voices because apparently being deaf also means lacking intelligence. "Exactly," Sophie signed, her movements becoming expressive. Or my favorite, when they learn about my deafness, they immediately address whoever's beside me instead, like I've become invisible. As they talked, Claire noticed how Sophie relaxed, how her expression brightened. The girl was intelligent, delightfully sarcastic, and desperate for genuine connection. "I'm finishing high school," Sophie explained when Claire asked about her education. "I attend Lexington Preparatory. It's mainstream with a deaf support program." "Do you have a close friend there?" Claire asked. Sophie's hands paused. "Not many. The hearing students think I'm arrogant because I'm Dalton's daughter, and the deaf students think I'm privileged and can't relate to their experiences." "That sounds isolating," Claire replied honestly. "It's my reality," Sophie signed with a shrug that poorly concealed her hurt. "At least I have my photography. Actually, I'm quite talented at it." "I'd love to see your portfolio sometime," Claire told her. Across the room, Marcus Dalton worked the crowd with polished confidence, seemingly oblivious to his daughter's existence. Claire couldn't help noticing how Sophie's gaze periodically drifted toward him, longing and bitterness mingling in her expression. "Your father appears very occupied tonight," Claire commented delicately. Sophie's smile turned cynical. "He's perpetually occupied. Dalton Technologies demands constant attention, you understand." Her signing adopted a mocking quality, clearly mimicking phrases she'd seen repeatedly. "He's constructed quite an empire since my mother's death. I'm extremely proud of him." The rehearsed quality of the statement was painful. "When did you lose your mother?" Claire asked gently. "When I was 8. That's when everything transformed." Sophie's hand slowed. "Before that, our home was filled with laughter, which is ironic. My mother was a theater director. She ensured I experienced performance art through visual storytelling, through the emotions on actors' faces. After she died, the laughter stopped. Dad immersed himself in business, and I became the complication to manage." The complication? The deaf daughter. The experts, the procedures, the interventions. "He wanted to cure me." Sophie's signs became sharp, precise. "He never learned sign language. Not one gesture. We have interpreters at home, rotating strangers I barely recognize. He speaks to them about me while I'm sitting right there in the room." Claire felt anger toward Marcus Dalton rising in her chest. How could someone so accomplished fail so completely at reaching his own child? "I'm sorry," she signed simply. Sophie shrugged again. "Like I said, it's my reality." She glanced past Claire's shoulder, her expression changing. Speaking of which, Claire turned to see Marcus Dalton approaching, followed by a photographer and his assistant, a crisp-looking woman in her 40s carrying a digital tablet. "Sophie," Dalton said, his lips clearly visible as he spoke deliberately and loudly. "We need photographs." He didn't look at Claire, didn't question her presence. The assistant gestured professionally for Sophie to come. Sophie's face smoothed into the same polite mask from earlier. Before leaving, she quickly signed to Claire. "See? He doesn't even wonder who you are or what we're discussing." As Sophie walked away to pose beside her father for the cameras, Claire felt unexpected determination solidifying within her. In her medical center work, she'd encountered numerous children isolated by deafness, but never someone so profoundly alone while surrounded by such wealth. The evening progressed, and Claire observed as Sophie stood cooperatively for photographs, nodded at appropriate moments, and maintained her flawless, practiced expression. Not once did Dalton or anyone else try to include her in the conversations surrounding her. When the formal proceedings concluded, Claire saw Sophie slip away from the crowd, heading toward a side exit that seemed to lead to an outdoor terrace. Making an impulsive decision, Claire followed. Outside, the Boston night was crisp and clear, the terrace illuminated by soft lighting. Sophie stood at the stone railing, gazing out over the cityscape below. "Escaping?" Claire signed as she approached. Sophie turned, relief evident on her face. "Just breathing. Sometimes I need distance from all those moving lips." Before Claire could respond, the terrace door opened again. Marcus Dalton stepped out, his expression shifting from worry to confusion when he saw his daughter wasn't alone. "Sophie, we're departing," he said, looking at his daughter, but making no effort to sign. Claire saw Sophie's face fall, saw the barrier rise between father and daughter. In that moment, she made a decision that would alter all their lives. "Mr. Dalton," she said aloud, while simultaneously signing for Sophie's benefit. "My name is Claire Morgan. I'm an interpreter, and I've been conversing with your daughter. She's remarkable." Dalton blinked, clearly surprised by this direct approach from someone he probably considered service personnel. "I appreciate that. Are you employed by the venue?" "Yes," Claire replied, continuing to sign. "But right now, I'm simply someone who believes you should understand what you're missing by not being able to communicate directly with Sophie." The billionaire's expression hardened, but Claire detected something else there too, a flash of shame quickly concealed. Sophie's eyes widened, her hands frozen midair. Marcus Dalton's jaw tightened. "Miss Morgan," Claire supplied, continuing to sign every word. "Miss Morgan," he repeated. "I value your input, but my relationship with my daughter is personal." Claire felt her professional restraint slipping. "With all due respect, Mr. Dalton, Communication shouldn't be personal. It should be accessible. Olivia stood alone all evening while everyone celebrated your philanthropy. Do you understand the contradiction? Genuine pain flashed across Dalton's face before his business persona reasserted itself. You've crossed a line, Miss Morgan. Sophie, let's go. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom, clearly expecting his daughter to follow. Sophie hesitated, her eyes meeting Claire's. I apologize. Sophie signed quickly. He becomes defensive about this subject. It's been this way since the crash. Crash? Claire asked, but Sophie was already moving away. Find me at Lexington Prep. Sophie signed before vanishing through the door. Claire stood alone on the terrace, pulse racing. She'd jeopardized her professional standing by confronting a powerful patron. Worse, she might have complicated things for Sophie. The following morning, Claire woke to a message from her supervisor. Claire, contact me urgently. There's been feedback about your behavior at last night's benefit. Her stomach sank. This was precisely what she'd feared. With her rent already 3 weeks late and educational debt accumulating, she couldn't afford to lose contracts. She'd left a secure position at Boston Public Schools 8 months ago when funding cuts eliminated her department, and freelance work had proven far more unpredictable than anticipated. She returned the call with shaking hands, prepared for termination. I can explain, Claire began when her supervisor answered. You certainly will explain, came the stern response. Marcus Dalton's office contacted us this morning. They've requested you specifically for a private meeting at his residence this afternoon. Claire nearly dropped her phone. They what? I have no idea what transpired last night, but somehow you've captured the attention of one of Boston's most influential figures. This could be tremendous for the agency, Claire. Don't disappoint us. For hours later, Claire found herself driving through the impressive gates of the Dalton estate in Brookline, overlooking the Charles River. The contemporary steel and glass mansion reflected the overcast Boston sky, stark and magnificent against immaculately landscaped grounds. A staff member met her at the entrance. Mr. Dalton is expecting you in his study. Follow me, please. Claire followed through corridors displaying gallery-quality artwork. She noticed a striking black and white photograph featuring dramatic contrasts of light and shadow that seemed different from the other traditional pieces. Sophie's work, the staff member commented, noticing Claire's interest. She's exceptionally gifted. Before Claire could respond, they arrived at Dalton's study, a spacious room with expansive windows overlooking the river. Marcus Dalton stood as they entered, dismissing the staff member with a gesture. Miss Morgan, thank you for coming. His tone was coolly businesslike. Please have a seat. Claire took the offered chair, bracing herself for a formal complaint or perhaps a request to sign a confidentiality agreement about his daughter's condition. I owe you an apology, Dalton said instead, completely surprising her. Excuse me? Your comments last night, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. They were inappropriate in that context, but not incorrect. It's been made clear to me that I failed my daughter in fundamental ways. The vulnerability in his confession caught Claire off guard. Sir, I apologize for speaking so directly. It wasn't appropriate. Perhaps it was precisely appropriate, Dalton replied, moving to sit behind his desk. You're the expert after all. That's why I've asked you here today. He placed his palms flat on the desk, a businessman organizing his approach. Sophie lost her hearing in the same accident that killed her mother. She was 8. The physician said it was auditory nerve trauma, permanent, irreversible. I spent the first 3 years afterward consulting specialists worldwide, pursuing every intervention, attempting to fix her, he continued. Fix her, Claire echoed softly, remembering Sophie's words. Dalton flinched. Yes. I couldn't accept that my daughter would never hear again. By the time I finally accepted it, patterns had been established, interpreters, specialists, educators, professionals I compensated to communicate with her, so I wouldn't have to face my own failure. He reached for a framed photograph on his desk, turning it so Claire could see. A younger Dalton stood with a beautiful woman and a small, smiling child, Sophie, before the accident. Elizabeth, my wife, started teaching Sophie sign language when she was a toddler. Baby signs, they called it. Elizabeth believed in expression in all its forms. She was a theater director, but she always said storytelling was just one language among countless others. Sophie mentioned her mother was in theater, Claire said. Dalton looked up sharply. She spoke about Elizabeth? Briefly. She said your home once had laughter. He set the photograph down carefully, as though it might break. It did. After the accident, I couldn't tolerate happiness anymore. I packed away Elizabeth's photographs, stopped attending performances she'd loved. I believed I was shielding Sophie from painful memories, but perhaps I was only protecting myself. Claire watched emotions play across his face: grief, regret, determination to make amends. Despite her initial anger toward him, she felt her perspective evolving. Mr. Dalton, why exactly am I here? He straightened, businessman mode re-engaging. I want to employ you, Miss Morgan. Not through your agency, but privately, a personal arrangement to interpret for Sophie. I appreciate that, but… No, he said firmly. To teach me sign language. I should have learned years ago. I want to communicate with my daughter directly, without intermediaries. Claire sat back, genuinely astonished. That's admirable, Mr. Dalton, but learning ASL requires time and dedicated practice. It's not something accomplished in a few sessions. I understand. I'm prepared to commit to regular instruction over the next 18 months minimum. 3 times weekly if my calendar permits. He named a figure for her compensation that made Claire's eyes widen. Would that arrangement interest you? It would eliminate her financial struggles immediately. But money wasn't her primary concern. Before I answer, may I ask why now? What changed? Dalton's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Last night, I observed my daughter's face when you communicated with her in sign. I realized I haven't seen her look that vibrant in years. Then this morning, she left this on my desk. He handed Claire a folded piece of paper. Inside was handwritten text. Dad, I know you're upset about what happened with the interpreter last night, but for 15 minutes, someone recognized me, not just Dalton's deaf daughter. If you truly want to honor Mom's legacy with your medical center donations, remember what she always said. True connection begins with being seen. I haven't been seen in a very long time. Sophie. Claire carefully refolded the note, her throat tight with emotion. I've spent years directing money at my daughter's deafness, Dalton said quietly. Funding deaf education facilities, supporting research, donating to organizations, all while failing to make the one investment that truly mattered. It's not too late, Claire said. Sophie is still young. She's leaving for university next year. Yale has already accepted her through early admission. Pride flickered across his face. I have a limited window to repair what I've damaged. Claire considered her response carefully. Mr. Dalton, I'd be honored to teach you ASL, but I need to be transparent about something. This won't be immediate. Learning to sign is one challenge. Rebuilding your relationship with Sophie is another. I understand. He rose from his desk. I'm prepared to do whatever's necessary. Now there's someone else who'd like to see you. As if choreographed, the study door opened and Sophie entered. Seeing Claire, she broke into an authentic smile. You came, she signed. Your father invited me, Claire replied in sign. Sophie's eyes moved between Claire and her father, confusion evident. Why? Dalton cleared his throat awkwardly. I'll let Miss Morgan explain. I have a video conference in 10 minutes. He paused at the door, looking back at his daughter. Sophie, I will talk later. After he left, Sophie's hands moved rapidly. What's happening? Am I in trouble for last night? Are you? Claire asked. Neither of us is in trouble, Claire assured her. Your father has hired me to teach him ASL. Sophie's hands froze mid-sign, her expression one of complete shock. My father? Learning sign language? You're not serious. I am. He seems very committed. Sophie sank into the chair her father had occupied, her face showing complicated emotions of hope and doubt. He won't follow through. He never does with anything involving my deafness. Maybe this time will be different, Claire suggested gently. Why would it be? Sophie's signs were sharp, revealing years of letdown. Because this time, he's not trying to cure you. He's trying to change himself. For weeks later, Claire sat across from Marcus Dalton in his home study, watching him struggle through fingerspelling. His fingers laboriously formed each letter. Excellent. Claire signed and spoke simultaneously, her standard teaching approach. But remember, there's a dedicated sign for confronts that would be more efficient than spelling it out. Dalton frowned in concentration as he attempted the sign, his frustration visible when his fingers wouldn't comply. This is impossible, he muttered, dropping his hands. I'm too old to learn a new language. You learn Japanese for business negotiations, Claire reminded him, having learned about his linguistic achievements during their sessions. That was different. I was younger, and it was... He trailed off, aware of the implication. More important, Claire supplied, keeping her tone neutral. Dalton had the decency to look ashamed. I was going to say simpler, but you're right to challenge me. Over these weeks, Claire had discovered that beneath his imposing exterior, Marcus Dalton was multifaceted, genius in business, but emotionally stunted by grief, capable of extraordinary focus, yet blind to what was immediately before him. Let's try something different, Claire suggested. Instead of business vocabulary, let's practice something you might actually want to say to Sophie. Dalton looked uncomfortable. Such as, how about I'm proud of you? That's something every child needs to hear. Something flickered across his face. Does she think I'm not proud of her? Claire chose her words carefully. Mr. Dalton, when did you last tell her directly? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Let me demonstrate, she said, showing him the sign. I'm proud of you. Dalton watched intently, then mimicked her movements with surprising grace. For all his complaints, he was actually advancing faster than most adult learners. Perfect, Claire encouraged. Now try I love you. The simple hand sign, pinky, index finger, and thumb extended, seemed to overwhelm him. After attempting it, he abruptly stood and walked to the window. Mr. Dalton, I haven't said those words to Sophie since Elizabeth died, he admitted, his back to Claire. Not aloud, and certainly not in sign. Why not? He turned, his composure cracking. Because every time I look at her, I see Elizabeth. I see what we lost. What I failed to protect. Understanding dawned on Claire. The accident. You were driving. Dalton nodded once, sharply. Ice on the bridge. A commercial truck lost control ahead of us. I swerved to avoid collision, but we struck the barrier instead. His voice became clinical, detached. Elizabeth died at the scene. Sophie was in the rear seat. The impact caused damage to her auditory system. When she regained consciousness in the hospital, she couldn't hear anything. That wasn't your fault, Claire said gently. Tell that to my 8-year-old daughter, who woke up in absolute silence without her mother. Bitterness edged his words. For months afterward, she would have nightmares. Terrible, raw sounds. She couldn't hear herself. I couldn't comfort her. The only thing that soothed her was photography. She'd photograph for hours, these chaotic, dark images that her counselors said expressed her trauma. And now she's a photographer, Claire observed. A remarkable one, Dalton agreed, a hint of pride breaking through. She's been accepted to Yale's visual arts program. Elizabeth would have been. His voice caught. Elizabeth would have been so proud. The lesson continued, but Claire's mind kept returning to what Dalton had revealed. The accident explained so much about their fractured relationship, his guilt, his emotional withdrawal, his desperate attempts to fix Sophie's deafness while avoiding the deeper wound between them. Later that afternoon, Claire met Sophie at a cafe near Lexington Prep. These meetings had become routine, initially focused on discussing Dalton's progress with ASL, but evolving into authentic friendship. So, Sophie signed after they settled with their beverages. How's my father doing? Still hopeless. Actually, he's improving, Claire replied truthfully. He's more dedicated than you might expect. Sophie rolled her eyes. He approaches everything like a corporate takeover. Analyze it, master it, move to the next challenge. Is that so terrible if it means he's learning to communicate with you? I'll believe it when I see it, Sophie signed, but Claire noticed the hope hiding behind her skepticism. He told me about the accident today, Claire revealed carefully. Sophie's hand stilled. He never discusses that. I think he carries tremendous guilt. He should, Sophie signed, her movements suddenly sharp. Not for the accident. That wasn't his fault, but for what came after. For vanishing when I needed him most. What do you mean? Sophie sighed, her fingers moving through complex signs that revealed more emotion than her carefully controlled face. After Mom died, Dad sent me to specialized residential schools for the deaf. He visited on scheduled family weekends, always with an interpreter. We became strangers. When I finally came home permanently at 16, it was like living with a cordial stranger. Not my father. Claire felt her heart ache for both Daltons, a father and daughter separated not just by deafness, but by shared grief they couldn't express to each other. You never told me why you left your school position, Sophie signed, clearly wanting to change the subject. Claire hesitated before answering honestly. Budget cuts were the official explanation, but the truth is I was becoming too emotionally invested with the deaf students. My supervisor said I needed better professional boundaries. Sophie's expression was curious. What does that mean? It means I did things like transport deaf children home when their families forgot them, or advocate too forcefully for resources the school claimed they couldn't afford, Claire shrugged. Maybe they were right. I've never been skilled at emotional distance. Is that why you confronted my father at the benefit? Probably, Claire admitted. It wasn't very professional. It was exactly what I needed, Sophie countered. Even if nothing transforms with my father, you recognized me. That matters. Their conversation shifted to Sophie's photography portfolio and her upcoming senior exhibition. As they talked, Claire couldn't help noticing how Sophie animated when discussing her work, the same passionate intensity she'd glimpsed in Dalton when he spoke about his company. You should come to my exhibition next Saturday, Sophie signed. It's at the school gallery. I'd love to, Claire replied. Will your father attend? Sophie's expression clouded. He's been invited. He always makes appearances at school functions. Contributions to make, connections to maintain. You understand. But he doesn't really see your photography, Claire guessed. He sees it as a pastime, not a career, Sophie signed. He thinks Yale's business school would be more sensible than the visual arts program. Have you told him how important photography is to you?
How?
We barely communicate about basic daily things. You could show him, Claire suggested. Your photography speaks volumes, Sophie. Maybe it could bridge the gap words haven't. The following Saturday, Claire arrived at Lexington Prep's gallery 45 minutes before the exhibition was scheduled to begin. The space was already active with students making final preparations to their displays. Sophie spotted her immediately and gestured her over to a breathtaking collection of photographs dominating the gallery's main wall. Claire's breath caught as she took in the series. Black and white compositions that somehow conveyed profound emotion through contrast and composition. Sophie, these are extraordinary, she signed truthfully. The centerpiece was particularly powerful, a large photograph divided into two panels. The left panel depicted fragmented darkness with harsh angles, while the right panel showed gradual emergence of soft light, a sense of peace evolving from chaos. The title card read simply, After Silence. It's about the accident, Sophie signed, watching Claire's reaction carefully. The moment everything changed, Claire noticed something she hadn't seen initially. Embedded in the chaotic panel were barely visible words captured in various settings, while the peaceful panel contained what appeared to be hands forming signs. The words are things I remember hearing before I lost my hearing, Sophie explained. My mother's voice, theater performances, music. The signs represent the new language I had to discover. Before Claire could respond, a murmur passed through the gallery. Marcus Dalton had arrived, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. The school's principal hurried to greet him, leading him on what appeared to be a predetermined tour of selected student works. Sophie's face fell slightly.
See?
Always the philanthropist, never the father. But as the principal attempted to guide Dalton toward a different section, something unexpected happened. Dalton stopped, said something that made the principal look surprised, and then walked directly towards Sophie's display. "Your father is coming this way," Claire signed quickly. Sophie straightened, her expression guarded as Dalton approached. She didn't see what Claire did, the way Dalton's eyes widened as he truly observed her artwork. The flash of recognition when he read the title, after silence. What happened next astonished them both. In full view of the gathering crowd, Marcus Dalton raised his hands and slowly, deliberately signed, "These are beautiful. I'm proud of you." Sophie's shock was visible, her hands frozen at her sides. For a moment, Claire feared she wouldn't respond. Then, with trembling fingers, Sophie signed back, "Thank you." It was a small exchange, painfully elementary compared to the complex thoughts both clearly wanted to express. But in that moment, as father and daughter looked at each other with unguarded emotion for perhaps the first time in a decade, Claire understood that something fundamental had transformed. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this moment of connection would be challenged before the evening was over, by a revelation that would force both Daltons to confront the true reason for their years of distance. The exhibition continued, with Sophie reluctantly pulled away by her photography instructor to speak with other attendees. Marcus Dalton remained in front of her photographs, studying each one with an intensity that surprised Claire. "You didn't tell me she was this talented," he said when Claire approached. "I did actually," Claire replied. "You just weren't ready to hear it." He acknowledged this with a slight nod. "These aren't just impressive for a high school student. They're extraordinary by any standard." He gestured to after silence. "This one especially. It's vulnerable, authentic." "She's been trying to communicate things through her photography for years," Claire said gently. "It's been her voice when she felt you couldn't hear her." Dalton's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. "I've been a fool, haven't I?" Before Claire could respond, the gallery lights dimmed slightly, signaling the formal start of the exhibition. The principal took center stage, welcoming everyone and thanking the evening's distinguished guests, particularly Mr. Dalton, whose generous support of the school's arts program had made events like this possible. "And now," the principal continued, "it is my great honor to announce this year's recipient of the Elizabeth Dalton Memorial Scholarship for Excellence in Visual Arts." Claire saw Sophie freeze across the room. This was clearly unexpected. This scholarship, established 7 years ago by Mr. Marcus Dalton in honor of his late wife, provides a full year of advanced study at the Florence Institute of Photography following graduation. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Such an opportunity was extraordinary and expensive. This year's recipient has demonstrated exceptional talent, emotional depth, and technical excellence beyond her years. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to announce that the scholarship goes to Miss Sophie Dalton. Applause erupted. Sophie stood motionless, her expression a complicated mixture of shock, confusion, and something that resembled anger. All eyes turned to her, waiting for her to approach the podium. Instead, she turned and walked quickly out of the gallery. The principal faltered, looking uncertainly at Dalton. After an awkward moment, Dalton stepped forward. "Thank you for your understanding," he addressed the crowd smoothly. "My daughter is understandably overwhelmed. If you'll excuse me." He followed Sophie's path out of the gallery, leaving confused whispers in his wake. Claire hesitated only a moment before going after them both. She found them in an empty classroom down the corridor. Sophie's hands were flying in rapid, furious signs that Claire knew Dalton couldn't possibly follow at his beginner's level. "How could you?" Sophie was signing. "Using Mom's name like that without even informing me, making decisions about my future without consulting me." Dalton looked helplessly at Claire when she entered. "I can't understand her when she signs that rapidly." Claire stepped forward. "She's upset that you created a scholarship in her mother's name without discussing it with her, and that you're making decisions about her future without her input." Dalton's expression hardened. "I thought she'd be delighted. This is a prestigious opportunity." "I don't want to go to Florence," Sophie signed vehemently, with Claire translating aloud. "I've been accepted at Yale. I've prepared for this for years, and you just decide without asking me that I should spend a year in Florence instead." Yale will still be there afterward. That's not the point. Sophie's signs were so forceful they seemed to cut the air. You've done this my entire life. Decided what's best for me without ever asking what I want. I'm your father. It's my responsibility to… To what? Control me? Send me away whenever it's convenient? First all those residential schools, and now Florence. Dalton flinched as if struck. Those schools were to give you the best education possible for your situation. My situation? Sophie's eyes flashed. You mean my deafness, or the fact that you couldn't bear to look at me after Mom died? The raw accusation hung in the air between them. That's not true, Dalton said, his voice hollow. Isn't it? Sophie's hands trembled as she signed. You sent me away for 8 years, Dad. 8 years. You visited on family weekends with your interpreters and your forced conversations. And then you'd disappear again. Do you know what that felt like? To be 8 years old, suddenly deaf, my mother dead, and then abandoned by my father too. Claire translated faithfully, her heart aching for them both. I was trying to protect you, Dalton said, his composure cracking. What couldn't you give me? Understanding. Dalton's control finally broke. I couldn't understand what you were experiencing, Sophie. I couldn't help you. Every time you'd try to communicate something and I couldn't understand. Every time you'd suffer and I couldn't comfort you. It was like losing you all over again. His words hung in the silence, raw with a decade of suppressed emotion. So instead of learning how to talk to me, Sophie signed more slowly now. You sent me away and threw money at the problem. Dalton didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. I understand how it appears. But Sophie, I didn't send you away because I didn't want you. I sent you away because I was terrified of failing you worse by keeping you with me. Worse than abandonment. I was broken after your mother died, Dalton admitted. Drowning in guilt, barely functioning. I convinced myself you'd be better off with professionals who understood deafness, who could give you a community I couldn't. I needed my father, Sophie signed, tears now streaming down her face. Not community, not specialists. Just you. Dalton moved toward her, then stopped, uncertainty in every line of his body. I didn't know how to be what you needed. You didn't try, Sophie signed, but her anger was ebbing, replaced by old grief. You're right, Dalton admitted. I took the coward's way out. And then, when you were finally home, we were strangers to each other. I didn't know how to bridge that distance. Sophie studied her father's face. Is that why you're learning to sign now? To bridge the distance? Yes, he answered simply. A long silence stretched between them, filled with a decade of misunderstandings and missed connections. Finally, Sophie signed the scholarship. Did you really create it for Mom? Dalton nodded. She always believed art could heal wounds nothing else could touch. She would have been so proud of your talent, Sophie. But why Florence? Why now? Dalton looked at the floor, then back at his daughter. Because I saw your Yale acceptance letter. Because I realized you'd be leaving soon, and I'd missed so much already. Because… He hesitated, then continued with painful honesty. Because part of me thought if you were in Florence instead of New Haven, I'd have another year to learn how to talk to you before you were gone. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its vulnerability. Sophie's expression softened slightly. Dad, I wasn't planning to disappear from your life after high school. Weren't you? He asked quietly. I wouldn't have blamed you. Claire watched as understanding passed between father and daughter, perhaps the first real understanding they'd shared in years. I don't want to go to Florence, Sophie signed again, but gently now. Yale has been my dream. Dalton nodded slowly. Then Yale it is. The scholarship can go to another student. But, Sophie continued, maybe we could go to Florence together sometime. Mom always wanted to take me there. Dalton's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with emotion he couldn't quite contain. I'd like that very much. Hesitantly, he raised his hands and signed slowly but correctly. I'm sorry I failed you. I love you, Sophie. Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks as she watched her father's hands form the words she'd waited so long to see. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce embrace. Dalton held her tightly, his own eyes closed against tears. Over Sophie's shoulder, he mouthed thank you to Claire. Claire slipped quietly from the room, giving father and daughter the privacy they deserved. As she walked back toward the gallery, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing she had played a small part in healing a wound that had festered for too long. 7 months later, Claire sat in the audience at Lexington Prep's graduation ceremony. As valedictorian, Sophie delivered her address in sign language with a professional interpreter voicing her words for the hearing audience. From her seat, Claire could see Marcus Dalton in the front row, watching his daughter with undisguised pride. Sophie's speech was eloquent and moving, touching on themes of communication, connection, and the courage to bridge divides. But it was her closing words that brought tears to Claire's eyes. In a world that often values only what can be heard, Sophie signed, I've learned that the most important conversations happen in silence, in the space between words, in art, in gestures of love that transcend language. My journey from silence to expression wouldn't have been possible without 2 people. My mother, who taught me that stories exist even for those who can't hear them, and my father, who learned that love doesn't always need sound to be understood. After the ceremony, amid the crowd of celebrating families, Claire found herself face to face with both Daltons. We have something to show you, Sophie signed excitedly. She nodded to her father, who pulled out his phone and opened a photo gallery. The images showed a spacious studio filled with natural light, photography equipment, and several workstations. We've converted the North Wing solarium into Sophie's studio, Dalton explained. She'll use it when she's home from Yale. It's beautiful, Claire said sincerely. And that's not all, Sophie signed. Tell her, Dad. Dalton smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. I've established a foundation in Elizabeth's name. The Dalton Foundation for Deaf Arts and Education. We'll be funding art therapy programs, sign language education, and scholarships for deaf students. And, Olivia added proudly, all foundation staff will be required to learn ASL. No exceptions. That's wonderful, Claire said. Both of you must be very proud. We are, Dalton replied, his hands forming the signs simultaneously with his words, still basic, but much more fluid than before. And we'd like you to be part of it, Claire. As our education director, if you're interested. Claire stared at them in shock. Education director? Me? Who better? Sophie signed. You're the one who taught us that communication isn't just about words. It's about actually seeing each other. Claire looked between them, the brilliant, resilient young photographer and the powerful businessman who had finally learned the most important language of all, and knew her answer immediately. I'd be honored, she said, signing and speaking the words that would begin the next chapter for all of them.